He thinks Vona is very, very good.
He loves Vona.
He does, but he thought it was impactful in this matchup. And he's very aware of the arms race that's going on between these Esper decks. He sees the 3-mana Planeswalkers as a focal point, but doesn't think you can go that far down that road because you just become so much worse against the other decks.
I don't know about that.
We'll see. We'll see how that shakes out.
I agree that you can't cut all of your Chemist's Insights. We've talked a little bit about that. One of the things that continually happened was both from like the Bant side of things and the Esper side of things, players would start to accumulate Planeswalkers, Teferi, Time Raveler, Narset, Parter of Veils, Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. Where are the Elder spells?
That's a good question, Jerry.
That's what I want to know.
That's a good question. We've seen several board states with 3 or 4 Planeswalkers sitting on the battlefield, so I don't know. Maybe it will be the time for the Elder spell at some point. Dylan just going to go ahead and play a Root Snare there for no effect.
Just discard a card
Yep.
to try and transform the Search for Azcanta. I like it.
Yeah, you have to be aggressive like that. He needs to get that search online as soon as possible. Both players playing a very slow game. Only the search on the battlefield presently. Edgar playing a land and passing.
It would be kind of nice to have an additional card to discard to like the Jumpstart of Chemist's Insight, but I think this is completely fine too.
Yeah, especially if you do have an additional copy of Chemist's Insight in your hand, which Dylan did have there. You can see how you're incentivized to cycle a little bit more.
Oh, yeah. So just draw go happening on the early turns. Edgar obviously doesn't want to take the shields down because the Simic Nexus deck has a lot of scary 4-mana permanents that they could resolve.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of one of the ways where Narset Parter of Veils is a little bit weaker than Chemist's Insight. And you see here, Edgar gets to keep open mana for Mortify or Absorb, anything like that, while also still just getting to develop with a Chemist's Insight.
Dylan did find room for the second Sinister Sabotage in his deck list this week. Some players going as low as 1 counter spell. It'll help here in this matchup to have 2, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it comes at the cost of a Tamiyo, I think.
Yeah, you can either say the Tamiyo or I think 1 Blink of an Eye is on the lower end. We've seen some players with 2.
Yep. Space is getting tight.
Oh, yeah.
As this deck gets new prints.
No, this deck is really honed to a razor's edge, and it feels like you're just debating 2 or 3 spots at most at this stage. Edgar going to go ahead and fire off Thought Erasure, taking a look at Dylan's hand. Looks like 2 Wilderness Reclamations and a Search in hand for Dylan.
Backup Search for Azcanta, not that bad. Because the first one is so potent that the Esper control deck almost certainly has to kill it if they want a chance at winning the game.
Right.
So that's not the worst thing to hold on to. And then, yeah, I think Dylan's plan here was to not jam Wilderness Reclamation into potential counterspell and just continue developing with Chemist's Insight and try and transform that Search for Azcanta.
Yeah, trying to play nice and slowly. And that is how Simic Nexus has historically liked to play this matchup. You, in general, have the time. That's changing a little bit, though, with the addition of these 3-mana Planeswalkers.
Yeah, you don't have a ton of time.
Edgar, I believe, with 3 copies of Teferi Time Reveler in his main deck. I'm going to go ahead and double-check that for you. Maybe he has them split to the sideboard. 2 copies in the main deck, 1 more in the sideboard for Edgar.
And 0 Narsets total in the 75?
That is correct. Edgar, not a fan of Narset.
That's just because he hasn't cast it yet.
Could be. It's still very early on in these formats. Expect things to change a lot. So Edgar going to go ahead and make a play here. It's time for Teferi. And is Dylan going to respond? He is. He's going to activate that Azcanta, the Sunken Ruin, looking for one of those Sinister Sabotages right now. Not going to find it.
He does have a lot of options here, though.
Yeah, double Nexus, Growth Spiral, I believe.
2 opt, Growth Spiral, Nexus.
Gotcha. He's going to take the Nexus. He's going to put Edgar to the test, asking counterspell or no here.
Gotta imagine that if Edgar is willing to jam Teferi on this turn, he does have Absorb at the ready.
I agree. I think Dylan really needed to hit a counterspell there. It would have been extremely impactful to find the Sinister Sabotage. But instead, you have to assume that Edgar has shields up here. But maybe we're getting into 2 spell territory. I saw Dylan pick up a Tamiyo there. Does he have an 8th land? He does. Blast Zone in hand.
Yeah, so Dylan's going to get to resolve something on this turn. Edgar already knows that Dylan has access to a Wilderness Reclamation, so you probably just want to lead on that, expecting it to get countered, and then you can resolve the Tamiyo.
Dylan says no, Tamiyo first. Edgar has to counter that. It's absorb time.
Oh, this is wild.
And
so
you know what that means.
Yeah, Wilderness Reclamation comes down, trigger in the end step, access to 8 mana. Edgar knows that Dylan has access to a Nexus of Fate already.
Yep.
This could be it.
It could be. This is the window that Dylan's been looking for. This is what you play for on the Simic Nexus side. You find that turn. And it's hard to fault Edgar. You have to do something from the Esper side. You can't sit there forever. He needed a Teferi on the battlefield so he could start making some headway into this game.
I think I'm fine with the Teferi. I just don't think that I would go after the counter spell on Tamiyo. Because obviously Tamiyo's strong. You have the answer to it basically on the battlefield already in Teferi. You just want to stop Dylan from chaining off here.
Right. I think a lot of it depends on the texture of Edgar's hand, how he could play the next turn.
Well, he knows what Dylan has access to. He knows he has another Reclamation. He knows he has Nexus of Fate.
Right.
And I think letting Dylan get to have this turn with access to Reclamation.
Just too scary.
And search for his Kanta, yeah, it's just too much.
I understand.
Dylan's going to pull too far ahead on this turn.
Dylan going to go ahead and play that Callous Dismissal, bouncing Teferi to hand. That's going to tax Edgar's mana going forward. Plus, don't forget that army. 1/1 creature. It's Wilderness Reclamation time. We're going to float some mana.
Yeah, end step float 3. Still get to activate as Kanta. 8 mana left over. If he gets to find a Nexus of Fate, gets another turn.
Look. Another look with the Opt if he wants it. There it is.
Yeah, 8 mana left over means that Opt is still live.
Going to bottom. Here's the top card.
Huh!
Passes the turn back to Edgar.
That's still okay.
I think so. Dylan with Counterspell in hand right now. Dovin's Veto may be able to change the equation somewhat, but still going to be hard for Edgar to fight through everything that Dylan can offer at this stage.
Yeah, Edgar has access to 6 mana. If he has a land drop, he's going to go up to 7. On the next turn, Dylan's going to have access to basically 20 mana.
All the mana. Here's thought erasure. That's step 1. Does Dylan want to fire off this Sabotage here? He does.
You might as well. At the very least, your opponent can just take the Sinister Sabotage. So
right.
At least this way, you don't give him a choice, and Dylan still has mana open to fire off a Chemist's Insight if he wants to.
Right. Gets to filter the top of his library a little bit. Seems fine. What's the follow-up from Edgar here? It's Teferi time again. Gonna go ahead and plus. Takes his draw. Gonna pass the turn back to Dylan, representing Dovin's ban.
Veto.
Veto.
Not a card.
I will never not do that. It's impossible. Why did they do this to me? They know Dovin Bond is a card. They know they've already cemented it in my head. This is a trap by Wizards just to ensnare me on coverage.
So Dylan opts at end step. Wilderness Reclamation dies to Despark, which is a pretty nice answer, but it's still uphill for Edgar.
Right. Yeah, any Tamiyo could rebuy that Reclamation. I think we saw Dylan draw a Nexus here. Going to go ahead and tack that to Teferi. It's Nexus time. Shuffle that back in.
Could have tried going for broke, activate Azcanta, look for another Wilderness Reclamation, but there are only 2 left in the deck, and I think that this is just fine.
Yeah, I think you'd rather do that on this turn if you're going to take that gambit.
Yeah, that's fair.
Dylan has Search, going to be able to bin that island. Going to have a think.
Or not, because, well, I guess that doesn't even change the equation. He would still be a mana short of trying to activate Azcanta and hit Nexus of Fate, so.
Didn't catch the draw there from Dylan.
Looks like another search. Might be Azcanta time now.
Gonna attack Teferi again. This is a turbulent few turns for Dylan. You expect this to go a little bit better in this position. Oh, he found the Wilderness Reclamation. That had to be the card Dylan was looking for there.
Oh, yeah. So, end step, trigger on the stack, float 1 mana.
Players are around the weekend in 30 seconds. Please make sure you are in your seat or heading to your seat.
Bunch of mana spent and has the other Nexus of Fate in hand, and here's where things are going to get out of control very quickly.
Yeah, 3 mana left over, so not a whole lot Dylan can do with that, but if he wants to, he can activate Azcanta a lot on the next turn.
Yes, he can. Plenty of mana available. Dylan heading into his turn. Just going to take that draw. I think he might have missed the search trigger there. But he's kind of reaching that point where he's looking to speed up his motions a little bit.
Yep.
7 of 8. You have 50 minutes. You may begin.
There's the Azcanta activation. Looking at the top 4. Found a Wilderness Reclamation. That equals another activation. We're going to jam that one. And we're going to move into the end step. 1 mana floating. Assume we're going to see another Azcanta activation here. There it is. Top 4. It's a whiff.
All land. Still has 6 mana at the ready. Chemist's Insight.
Yeah.
Gets another Wilderness Reclamation trigger.
Going to look to float that 6 mana here. There's the untap. Both Nexi now used. Good guy Edgar cleaning up a little bit for Dylan.
Edgar's going to stick around. I don't think he's going to go to the restroom.
Probably not. So Dylan activates again, only finds a Tamiyo.
Honestly, I don't think it really matters. Like, Edgar has no clock.
Right.
The army has chipped away at the Teferi, so it's nowhere near
minus.
ultimating or anything. Yeah, he can't minus to get rid of one of the reclamations.
We're going to cast that Chemist's Insight, see if we can find Nexus in those. We
Boom.
found it. That's it. That'll do it. It now becomes almost impossible for Dylan to miss. He's going to put Tamiyo into play.
Yeah, three Azcanta triggers or activations per turn.
Yep.
Plus a Tamiyo look. It's all but over.
Agreed. A little bit of trepidation on those few turns.
And a Nexus off the top, so that is.
Yep. Nice of Edgar to stick around while Dylan goes ahead and wins this game. There is that Tamiyo, going to plus here. Minus maybe, just grab Wilderness Reclamation. Effectively the same. Oh, he says it's already dismissal time.
It's like, yeah, I'm good. I'm just going to try and kill you, whatever.
Yeah, when you reach this point, there aren't really bad decisions to be made. And you're going to cast Callous Dismissal, bouncing Tamiyo. Can cast Tamiyo again. We're just going to move into end step here.
Float 3 mana. Bust out the scorecards.
And it's Azcanta time. Let's copy a Chemist's Insight. Do we want to cast it? Why not? What else are we doing? Have a good time.
Well, we'll cast this Nexus first. Put that back in the deck.
Sure. Maximize your odds. Plenty more Wilderness Reclamation to go here. Dylan just cashing the check now, going through the motions. Edgar said, just leave that tapped.
No, it does not tap quite yet.
There's a miss on that Azcanta trigger. Here's Chemist's Insight. A couple more cards in hand. And I think we're ready to go back to Dylan's turn now. Let's do it all over again. Gonna bin a Growth Spiral. Takes a draw. Smash you for 2. Here's Tamio. What do you think? Time for Edgar to concede?
It's probably been time.
I think he's incentivized too. I think he is the one who has the onus of winning a couple games that definitely don't want to draw.
Yeah, draw hurts them both. Effectively knocks them both out of top 8.
And Dylan is kind of the deck with more control over the clock. He can, in very good faith, play a bunch of very long turns. And Edgar recognizes that, is going to go ahead and pick up his cards. And we're going to head to sideboards here for game 2. I think Edgar improves a lot in the post-board game. Esper Control gets to...
Arboreal Grazers on both sides.
Yeah, I don't think that's the hot Esper Control tech yet. Maybe someday they'll pick up Arboreal Grazer. They'll just splash for Arboreal Grazer, right?
I mean, you have to beat Thief of Sanity somehow.
Yeah, that sounds fine to me. Good tech. We'll start with Dylan Hand, since his sideboard is represented on both sides. He's got 3 Arboreal Grazers, 3 Biogenic Ooze, 3 Negate, 2 Bond of Flourishing, 2 Carnage Tyrant, and 2 Crushing Canopy. Jerry, what are you doing if you're in Dylan's spot?
Carnage Tyrant kind of fell out of favor for a little bit because things like Biogenic Ooze were a little more versatile in the various matchups that you could bring them in against. So things like the white aggro decks, if there's like a Gruul deck, Sultai, whatever. But Carnage Tyrant now, I think, has come full circle to the point where it can start taking people by surprise again. So I like Carnage Tyrant, and I feel like Edgar might just not have any answers to it in the post-board games, which could be dangerous.
It's interesting how aware Edgar is of Dylan's deck list at this point. Certainly, as the tournament goes on, word gets around, you know, maybe Dylan has played one of Edgar's friends, maybe they've even talked at some point about what's going to be in the deck. So we'll see if Edgar leaves in a couple outs to that Carnage Tyrant.
Carnage Tyrant's definitely coming in, like all the copies of Negates. Crushing Canopy is decent. Some amount of Biogenic Oozes are decent. It all depends on how many things you want to cut and how you think Edgar is really going to sideboard.
I'll say this about Dylan's list. He does a much better job than some of the other Simic decks we've seen today of presenting diversified threats in these post-board games against Esper.
Yeah, I agree with that. Arboreal Grazer, I don't think, is a place that Dylan is going to go to, even if Edgar were willing to side in the Thief of Sanity's face up.
Right.
You know, just be like, look, I have 4 of these. Clearly you have to deal with this.
I agree. And that does leave Dylan at a bit of a weakness to that card. I'll say that. No Kroll Harpooners in Dylan's sideboard.
Right. Couple Crushing Canopies, which, you know, it's a fine answer, but it's a 3-for-3 trade on mana, so not great.
Meanwhile, over on Edgar's side, we're looking at 4 Thief of Sanity, 2 Vona, Butcher of Magan, 2 Hostage Taker, 2 Duress, 2 Cry of the Carnarium, 1 Teferi Time Reveler, 1 Omnixus Cruelty, and 1 Dovin's Veto.
Ban.
Jerry. Not ban.
Love the Dovin's Veto, love Teferi Time Raveler, love Duress. Thief of Sanity, especially good against Dylan's version of Simic Nexus, and with Edgar on the play in Game 2. Thief of Sanity is just the absolute most important card. It is the card he wants in his opening hand for sure.
Yeah, I think this Game 2 is going to be especially about the Thief of Sanity subgame, given that Edgar has the play in this game. Well, if you manage to somehow miss one of the earlier rounds of this tournament, I don't want you to fret too much. There is a place to catch up. You could head over to our YouTube page, Star City Games YouTube, where, of course, we have our SCG Tour events, but also the Versus Live Series, Commander Versus. There's flashback matches, so much more on our YouTube page. You can check it out at youtube.com/Star City Games. Jerry, do you go back and watch our broadcasts after we do them?
I really don't like listening to myself talk.
Yeah, I hate myself. I literally never want to hear myself talk again.
Yeah, I have been tricked into listening to my own podcast a couple times, but that's about it.
Sometimes on the podcast, there'll be a point specifically we talk about that I will go back and listen to, just because I want to kind of check out my thinking and remind myself what I was excited about at the moment. But as far as just hearing my performance, it's usually pretty painful for me.
I definitely like going back and watching coverage of events that I've missed and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, for example, if I were playing at a tournament over the course of the weekend, like I would still usually want to watch coverage of that event, and maybe there'll be a match that has a lot of people raving about, talking about, that was really exciting or cool or whatever, just demonstrated some mastery. I'll definitely go back and check that out.
Got a little peek at the player's hands there. Edgar has turn 2 Thought Erasure into turn 3 Thief of Sanity. And I think he's going to try and just run away with the game under that premise.
Well, the secret's out on Carnage Tyrant.
Yep. That could bring some changes to game 3. What is Dylan going to do against this Thief of Sanity? He has Blink of an Eye to buy a little time.
Yeah, hopefully find a 4th land, cast Growth Spiral, put in an additional land, and then maybe kick the Blink of an Eye, but that's about it. And if I'm Edgar, like, you've got to be aware of that sequence. Yeah.
He is. He takes Blink of an Eye. I think that's a great choice. I think that's really the only way I see for Dylan to kind of get into this game right now. He's going to have to mitigate that Thief of Sanity in some way. Could also just rip a Crushing Canopy. That would be fine.
Of course.
There is Thief of Sanity. Growth Spiral in response. Going to get that 3rd land onto the battlefield. Dylan going to go ahead and take the turn back. You could also just be super explosive here and play one of your powerful 4-drops, take advantage of the shields being down, and there is a Tamiyo in hand. Dylan going to go ahead and fire that off. Could rebuy the Blink if he wants to. Could just plus looking for something.
Yeah, I don't necessarily like rebuying the Blink. I think it's reasonable, but...
Dylan likes it. He's going to pick it up. He's going to force Edgar to make a decision, and Edgar makes it quickly. Tamiyo hits the bin. And how about a Duress? Does he take the Blink again? I think it's less likely this time around now that he has the mana open. Obviously depends on the texture of his hand.
Yeah, this is an interesting spot. Dylan obviously has a lot of potentially threatening cards, and I think what card Edgar takes will be indicative of what his hand actually looks like.
Edgar took the Blink again. Dylan takes his draw. Access to Tamiyo if he wants to play it here. Into that open mana. Has to be a little afraid, and he is. He passes. And you know what that means. Thief of Sanity time.
It connects.
Edgar taking a look at the top 3 cards of Dylan's library. What does he like? There's nothing more terrifying than when your opponent puts a really good card into your graveyard with Thief of Sanity, because then what did they take?
Right. There are some awkward moments in matchups like this, though, where the card you take might be something like a Chemist's Insight just because you don't want to deposit it into your opponent's graveyard.
No, you're right. Good point. Edgar passed on the Nexus of Fate there. Don't know what he took.
I mean, this is also a scenario where he could have just taken a Nexus of Fate.
Very true.
I don't think he would have like slow rolled it and thought about it for as long as he did, but...
Well, it's Carnage Tyrant time. He took a Growth Spiral, wanting to accelerate mana. Interesting decision. Here comes Thief of Sanity again. 3 more cards off the top of Dylan's deck. Has one he likes, but he binned 2 lands.
So didn't have much of a choice there. Can't play land off Thief of Sanity.
God, imagine. Like it's not good enough in control matchups.
Right.
So Edgar has a play here. It's Teferi. Teferi's going to go ahead and plus.
Also known as Fog.
Yeah. I think this game's interesting, and I think you're seeing a really, really impactful sideboard choice from Dylan Hand. Most players passing on Carnage Tyrant, but this game's just over if Carnage Tyrant isn't in Dylan's deck.
Yeah. I mean, this makes it a lot closer at the very least.
Right.
I think it's completely reasonable for Dylan to say, well, this thing is a 3-turn clock, and the game is only getting worse every time I get hit with Thief of Sanity, so let's kind of enter into this race. But opting to kill the Teferi, which is reasonable.
Going to go ahead and deploy Searcher Escanta. We do know Dylan's still sitting with a negate in hand. Two more lands go to the graveyard for Dylan, so Edgar's not actually making choices with Thief of Sanity. He's just taking the card given to him. That doesn't mean it's bad.
No.
We have no way of knowing exactly what's under those thieves.
And it disguises it a lot, too, which is kind of good for Edgar.
Oh, yeah. Edgar's taking a look at those 2 cards. Searcher Escanta is one of them. That'll be a powerful option for Edgar as this game goes long. And here's a second copy of Thief of Sanity. Can Dylan keep up with that? So Therese Kanta gonna put Chemist's Insight into the graveyard and transform. Dylan takes a draw. Carnage Tyrant going on the offensive. Gonna drop Edgar down to 13. Does Edgar have outs left in the deck to Carnage Tyrant? Is there a Kaya's Wrath somewhere?
I doubt Kaya's Wrath is still in the deck, but Edgar could do some weird things like connect with Thief of Sanity, find a biogenic ooze, put enough power into play where either you save a turn off the clock by chump blocking, or even, you know, you eventually just get to trade with the Carnage Tyrant.
He could find the other Carnage Tyrant.
That's true too.
Dylan gonna fire off Chemist's Insight and pass the turn back to Edgar. And now Edgar's card selection with those Thief of Sanity's kind of going bonkers. You're looking at the top 6 cards of Dylan's deck. Here they come. Dylan gonna fall to 10.
Yeah, this is one of those situations though where you don't even care about raw cards, right? You just need a specific answer.
2 more lands go to the bin. 2 more lands go to the bin. Edgar just taking what he's given.
Well, both blast zones are gone, so you don't really have to worry about that.
Here's a Tamiyo.
What does that do exactly?
Thought Erasure in the graveyard is interesting. It does enough that Dylan says, okay, it's negate time. And Edgar going to take advantage of the shields being down to stick a Wilderness Reclamation into play.
That's a big one.
The Reclamation deck now, says Edgar. Gonna untap all those lands. Cast the Chemist's Insight. Dylan says, I know that trick. And the turn passes back to Dylan. Edgar still facing this Carnage Tyrant. The clock is ticking. This game incredibly close right now. Here comes Carnage Tyrant. Edgar falls to just 6. What does Dylan have to offer on this turn? He has Nexus in hand.
It's interesting. I don't know that you would necessarily want to run that into open mana. It's kind of dangerous.
It would be terrifying. Just jamming.
And Edgar doesn't want to fire off the Chemist's Insight at end step, maybe needing the cards that he has.
Let me propose this, though. You'll never have closed mana again, so unless you have, like, second Nexus of Fate, you can just say, why don't I take this gamble here? Like, Edgar will never be tapped low, where you'll be able to stick that ever again in this match.
That is fair. I mean, you can wait for Edgar to spend the mana on his main phase, get the Reclamation on tap, or maybe he taps too low and you get to resolve a Nexus when he tries to cast Teferi and Chemist's Insight or
Against
something.
the lesser player, I like that line of thinking. Against Edgar, I just don't know if he's going to expose himself to that kind of vulnerability.
Well, the thing is if Dylan runs Nexus of Fate into a counterspell, then Edgar has free reign to actually do that stuff.
Right.
So now you're forcing Edgar to, like, you're just keeping him honest, basically.
Yeah. So Edgar put a biogenic ooze in the graveyard, and that points to me that he has something in mind for this Carnage Tyrant. Better than biogenic ooze.
Yeah, and didn't even have to think about the Thief's attacking or not.
Right.
So he clearly has something.
He's got Carnage Tyrant. He's got to, right? There it is, Carnage Tyrant from Edgar. Kind of the perfect answer in this scenario.
I guess the lesson we're learning here is that you should only play one Carnage Tyrant in the sideboard of your
Right.
Civic Nexus deck.
Maybe. Maybe. And you should draw it. Never give it to Thief of Sanity. It's just good game planning. Does
Notable.
Dylan have a way around this Carnage Tyrant?
Notable that there's only 20 minutes left on the clock, too.
I agree. Could come into play. Dylan finds a crushing canopy. Going to point that at the Wilderness Reclamation. Trying to choke Edgar on mana. But looks like Edgar has one of Dylan's counterspells at the ready. It is Sinister Sabotage. Going to protect that Wilderness Reclamation here. Edgar's going to untap. Cast Chemister's Insight. And passes the turn back to Dylan. What does Dylan have here?
It took a lot of Thief of Sanity hits to get to this spot.
It did.
I think it kind of speaks to the power of Carnage Tyrant in this matchup.
You think back to that turn where Dylan could have left Teferi on the table, and you wonder how it affects the game. There's no way of knowing whether that's correct or not. Obviously,
No.
A million things can happen from that point. But it's interesting.
It was definitely a decision. And I don't think it is clear which one was correct. Obviously,
I don't think so either.
Obviously, you don't want to be giving your opponent 2 cards a turn.
Here's a Dovin's Veto, responding to that Tamiyo. Carnage Tyrant going to attack. Edgar, all too willing to block. Both Carnage Tyrants hit the bin. Here's Biogenic Ooze.
This is plan B from Dylan. Trade off the Tyrants. Maybe be able to win on the next turn with Biogenic Ooze, but it seems unlikely.
It does look like it resolved. So that's step 1. Edgar can get so deep into his deck this turn, as well as Dylan's deck, quite frankly. Gonna flip that search. Has Wilderness Reclamation.
And the Thieves come in again.
Yep. 6 more cards off the top of Dylan's deck. Finds Nexus of Fate, just shows it to Dylan, and that's gonna get this concession. And we're headed to a deciding Game 3 between Dylan Hand and Edgar Magalhaes.
Yeah, like we said, not a lot of answers to Thief of Sanity in Dylan Hand's sideboard, and certainly proved to be problematic in that game.
I have to say, I'm really glad we got to see this match, both because I think it's super interesting. I think these players are both playing at a very high level. But I also feel like during this match, my pronunciation of Edgar's name has just come into its own. Like, I feel like I've really found my groove.
You have been practicing.
I have been. And look, this isn't the first week I've practiced. This has been an ongoing thing since I started commentating here on the SCG Tour. And only in this match do I feel like I finally have a grasp on it. Players going back to the sideboard here. Carnage Tyrant revealed. Edgar knows that's going to be a pressure point in this matchup, but found a way around it there. Does he want to make any changes? Does he want to leave a copy of Kaya's Wrath in the deck? I think it's defensible. I mean, between Biogenic Ooze and Carnage Tyrant.
And he saw multiple oozes, too.
He did.
So I think having access to 1 or 2 Kaya's Wraths is completely reasonable. And this is a big reason why you see a lot of the content creators kind of rally against the idea of sideboarding guides.
Yep.
Because Dylan Hand's deck is set up so different from all the other Simic Nexus decks we've seen in the tournament.
Yep.
And this is where you need to be able to adjust your deck on the fly. And Edgar knows this.
Absolutely. I mean, even not in this situation, Edgar is always diligent between every single game to check his sideboard, make adjustments, contemplate new plans. And you have to be.
And certainly be willing to change things up depending on whether you're on the play or the draw, too.
Yep. And we see Dylan making changes as well. Don't know how he wants to alter his options. We know the Oozes were in. We know the Carnage Tyrant was in. We know Crushing Canopy is in. All correctly, I believe. What else?
But now what? Now what happens?
Does he want to bring in the Grazer?
No.
Is he ready for 0-3 Reach to do its thing?
I don't think we're ever ready for that.
No. Good for you, Dylan. I'm very happy you did not bring that card in. At least as we saw, that is almost certainly correct. But when you get wrecked by Thief of Sanity like that, I wonder if there's a little bit of doubt creeping into the mind of Dylan Hand, saying, well, maybe this time I need those grazers.
One copy wouldn't be the worst thing. I'm still not a fan of it, though.
Just a big tournament over in Japan, and the top finishing Simic Nexus list from that tournament played one Arboreal Grazer in the main deck.
Why?
I don't know, but there was one copy there. Here you see a look at both players' hands. Dylan could have a nice one here with a speedy Biogenic Ooze. I've really liked that plan in this matchup. Also a good plan. Turn 2 search for Escanta. Let's see what Edgar's response is. I'm not positive Dylan has a green source right now.
That's what search is for.
It is. Yeah, and double Blast Zone in hand for Dylan. Biogenic Ooze, Growth Spiral, blink of an eye, the rest of the hand.
Yeah, you don't need green mana right away. Obviously, you would prefer to fire off your Growth Spirals sooner rather than later. But all the ops, the Chemist's Insight, stuff like that, those are things that you can use your mana on in the early turns. It's not that big of a deal.
Edgar again going to take the blink, which makes me think there's another Thief of Sanity sitting right there. Although Dylan finds his green source here. That was an important find, for sure. If he can find a second one and respond to Edgar tapping out for a perceived Thief of Sanity with his own Biogenic Ooze, that's going to be a big game. And he drew another green source. He's going to disguise it here, playing Blast Zone instead. What does Edgar have on this critical turn 3? It is going to be Thief of Sanity, and that means Dylan Hand is going to get to stick a Biogenic Ooze here if he so chooses. Moving quickly, that is absolutely his plan. Here comes Ooze. Both those Oozes going to get a counter on them.
It was even a breeding pool, too, so Dylan chose to take an extra 2 damage to disguise the fact that he had Biogenic Ooze.
I think it was real smart.
I mean, granted, the Esper deck is not putting you under a ton of pressure, at least not in your life total. Obviously, you don't want Thief of Sanity to connect 4 times, because at that point, you're almost certainly losing the game. And the life total isn't super relevant, but just really a heads-up play from
Here's
Dylan.
4 mana from Edgar, and he's found the Wilderness Reclamation off the top of Dylan's deck.
That's a free spell. We'll take it.
Oh, yeah.
Saw a non-zero.
Here's Despark on the Biogenic Ooze.
We saw non-zero amount of decks this weekend, like base blue-white control decks that were playing green for Wilderness Reclamation. Like, this is a card that you might be interested in playing in Esper control already.
Oh, yeah. If Esper could get away with playing Wilderness Reclamation, they would do so happily. What's the follow-up here from Dylan? It's another Biogenic Ooze. Whew, that's a big game.
The race is on.
Yeah, second copy comes down, and all these Oozes going to get bigger. 2 3/3s and a 4/4 now on the battlefield. Edgar going to have to scramble here.
Yeah, worth noting, Edgar has the basic island, too. So if he did keep in some amount of Kaya's Wrath, it might not even be castable here.
Right. Going to get another look at Dylan's top 3 cards. Are there any answers there for Edgar?
If you pick up a Nexus of Fate, though, you just get to go off, which is kind of sweet.
Yep. Didn't quite see what he grabbed. Passed on search. We know that. Edgar has 5 mana. It's Teferi time. He's thinking. Does he need to bounce here? He is going to bounce the original copy of Biogenic Ooze. Going to take an untap. Crushing Canopy on the search for Escanta.
It's pretty nice.
Well timed. It's the draw from Dylan. 4/4 and a 3/3 on the battlefield. Again, Dylan going to be asked if he wants to try and take out Teferi. He does. Sending the smaller Ooze at it. 4 points of damage towards Edgar. Edgar falls to 13. Dylan plays Memorial Genius, passes the turn back to Edgar. Thief of Sanity, and again, top 3 cards of Dylan's library. You know Biogenic Ooze is sitting there.
Yeah, that's kind of funny.
Yeah, and I have to think that might be the plan here from Edgar. No, gonna bin it. So we don't know what he took. He's got a second Teferi. That makes a lot of sense. But Dylan at the ready with negate. Last card in Dylan's hand. But Edgar did have Nexus of Fate off the top of Dylan's deck.
Get to connect with Thief of Sanity.
Look for another Nexus of Fate.
Cast Teferi, still Nexus of Fate.
Yeah.
Edgar has to deal with these oozes at some point, but it should be trivial, I would
I
think.
think so. He's generating a lot of value right now. 2 Carnage Tyrants. Right?
Yeah, that's what it looked like.
And he's passing on both them. Happy to have those out of Dylan's deck. What did he take? Here's Chemist's Insight. Follow-up search. Edgar going to play a land here. You have to think it's Nexus of Fate. It is. And Edgar's going to get to do this all again. Another turn. I love a lot about how Dylan's deck was set up for this matchup. I don't think you can concede this Thief of Sanity subgame.
No, it's Thief of Sanity is too important.
I think you just have to have the Harpooners. Edgar connects again. Happily takes a card. Here's Chemist's Insight. 2 cards deeper. Going to play a land. Flashback Chemist's Insight. It's Nexus of Fate again. More turns for Edgar. More resources generated.
And I think at this point he even found Akaya's Wrath. So no matter what, he's fine. Even if the Thief bricks off, like the search transformation doesn't give him anything.
This all seems very unlikely.
I agree.
Azcanta the Sunken Ruin now ready on the battlefield. Dylan getting a taste of his own medicine here as Edgar takes all the turns. He made that decision really quickly. Here's Teferi. That's going to plus, card in hand. Activate Azcanta. Finds Absorb. This one is over, Jerry. Edgar's going to be in our top 8.
Are you sure?
I am sure. I will call it at this stage. Edgar going to play Untapped Watery Grave. He's got Nexus of Fate again.
Is that 4? 4 in a row?
I think so, yeah. I think so. And that seems very unlikely, but the deck keeps shrinking, keep in mind. And the Nexus of Fates stay the same, still 4 there.
Thief of Sanity connecting against the Simic Nexus player is very similar to the Tamiyo interaction.
Very true. Here comes Thief again. One more time, Edgar says. One more time. Well, he's thinking this time. That suggests to me there's not just a Nexus to slam. Gonna bin the negate. Still in hand at 4 life. Here's 4 mana. Chemist's Insight. 2 more cards, please.
Why not?
Very minus. Time for one of those oozes to leave the battlefield. Activates Azcanta the Sunken Ruin. Finds another Absorb. Dylan with no cards in hand, by the way.
So could have floated 2 mana there. Wonder if Edgar did or not. No, just didn't even bother. Discards the Kaya's Wrath.
Yeah, he's pretty much reached the untouchable stage, especially with those 2 Carnage Irons in the bin. And that is going to do it. Dylan hand extends the hand, and Edgar Magalhaes moves on to our top 8 with Esper control.